Great. Don't start this, please. Don't start this. Antimatter, I'm having a lesson. Good morning. Do other place. You come in later. I'm having a Zoom. I'm having a Zoom lesson now. How do you do? All right. Okay. Hello, students. Good morning. I hope you had a great weekend. I'm still waiting for you to join the lesson. Please join up quickly and let's get started. It's 5 minutes on 9. I'm waiting for you to join. Do that quickly, please. Our discussion has been on delegated legislation. In this lesson, we've been able to look at the meaning of delegated legislation, which is basically the transfer of power by the parliament using the act of parliament to other bodies to make laws other than the legislature. The legislature is the body that has the supreme power to make laws for the nation. But oftentimes we see that such power is transferred to other bodies. I've been able to answer the question, what necessitates that? Why do we have the legislature, which is a body of elected representatives who should be saddled with the responsibility of lawmaking, giving out or transferring that power to bodies in the executive? We've been able to look at the reasons behind that. I'm still waiting for you to hook up to the lesson and get started with your do now. Let's look at your do now questions. You have 2 minutes to answer these 4 questions, 30 seconds per question, 2 minutes at most. An act of the National Assembly can also be called dash. A, secondary legislation, B, primary legislation, C, principle, and D, a doctrine. 2, delegated legislation can also be referred to as dash. A, public legislation, B, secondary legislation, C, parent act, and D, special legislation. Sorry for that typographical error there, please. The type of delegated legislation peculiar to the British monarch is known as dash. That's number 3. The type of delegated legislation peculiar to the British monarch is known as dash. A, bylaws, B, provisional orders, C, orders in council, and D, extraordinary order. Number 4 and the last. Statutory instruments are made by the dash. Statutory instruments are made by the dash. A, National Assembly. B, the Attorney General of the Federation. C, ministers and government departments. D, local governments. You have 2 minutes at most to get your answers in the chat box so that we can move on from there. 2 minutes. One minute more. You've spent 1 minute, 60 minutes. 60 seconds. Thirty seconds more. It should be in your last question now. Putting in the last answer. That's number 4. Ten seconds more. Right, let us have pens down. Stop writing. Pens down, everybody. And look up. Let's review the answers you've given and see if they are correct. If they are wrong, we get them corrected immediately. Question number 1. An act of the National Assembly can also be called dash. We see secondary legislation, option A, option B, primary legislation, C, principle, and D, doctrine. The correct answer here is primary legislation. An act of the National Assembly is primary legislation. It is a legislation that empowers any other body to make law. It forms the foundation on which delegated legislation can be made. Without such empowerment from a primary legislation, no power can be transferred to any other body to make laws. Number 2, delegated legislation can also be referred to as, the options are A, public legislation, B, secondary legislation, C, parent act, and D, special legislation. The answer here is secondary legislation. So you look at it in this way. If an act of the National Assembly is primary legislation, then delegated legislation falls under secondary legislation, which of course is a legislation getting its basis or its foundation from the act of the National Assembly. Number 3, the type of delegated legislation peculiar to the British monarch is known as dash. We give the options as A, bylaws, B, provisional orders, C, orders in council, and D, extraordinary order. The answer here is C, orders in council. In our previous lesson, we mentioned that orders in council are peculiar to the British monarch, that's the Queen of England. Usually, she gives short orders in conjunction with the Privy Council. If there is need for her to exercise unusual legislative powers, that could be occasioned by the threatening of the security of the state. So given that situation, she may not wait for the UK Parliament to act. She quickly meets the the Privy Council, and then orders are given in respect of the situation that are arisen. So option C, others in council, is the right option here. Remember, we've discussed that in our previous lesson. Number 4 and the last, statutory instruments are made by the dash. We give the options as 1, National Assembly, that is A, National Assembly, B, Attorney General of the Federation, C, ministers and government departments, D, local governments. The correct answer here is C, ministers and government departments. You know, every ministry covers the entire federation. So ministers make rules, orders, and regulations to govern the operations and activities of their ministries. All of these draw their empowerment from the National Assembly. So they are called what? Statutory instruments. Rules, orders, and regulations put in place as a statutory responsibility of the minister. That means an order given in view of the status of a minister or a government department to enable them perform their functions. These are statutory instruments. All right, note this and review your answers. Some of you got 3, some of you got 2. I think none of you got 1. You can clap hands for yourselves as we move on. All right, I can see Mr. Bright joining me.
Okay, so to get reduced, divide the ammeter by 2. That was how we got this 7. You can see how we got this 7 now.
Mr. Bright is studying my lesson. Okay, I voted you there so that I can move on. All right, students, let's make progress. What are the objectives of our lesson? At the end of this lesson, you should be able to review the types of delegated legislation, which we discussed earlier. 2, you should be able to explain why it is necessary for delegated legislation to be controlled. Of course, you know that when people are given power without any form of control or restraint, they tend to act beyond such powers or abuse such powers. Then you should be able to as well explain how the parliament, that is legislature, controls delegated legislation. You should also look at how the judiciary control delegated legislation, and finally explain other forms of control of delegated legislation. I expect you to put this PowerPoint up, to draw this graphic organizer, not PowerPoint this time. Review of the types of delegated legislation. We have dealt extensively with this, and I expect you at this point to be able to not just list the types of delegated legislation, but to be able to describe each of them. And I expect you to do that in 6 minutes, 2 minutes for each. I think that's enough. The types of delegated legislation before we move into today's lesson very quickly. What are the types? I played you a video on this, and we all enjoyed the lesson, and I'm sure we gained from it. So quickly, in 6 minutes at most, put down the types of delegated legislation for me, and then we move on from there.
This inside bracket, you have to add them together. 7 plus 10 is 17, as you can see here. Then what we did here was to say 2 times 22, which gave us 44. All over this 7.
Discussing it's instructing our own lesson. All right. We can continue with you. What is happening to my students today? You have 3 more minutes so that we can move on quickly. 3 more minutes. Types of delegated legislation. I'm sure at this point you have really understood what delegated legislation means. We started by saying that to delegate means to give power to somebody to act on your behalf. And there are times we find ourselves delegating responsibility, giving our power to people, go and do this, go and do that. Maybe because we are constrained or there are other factors that are making us not to have the time to carry out all the activities we should, so we can delegate responsibility. And in our context, we have been talking about the National Assembly, which almost all through the year delegates power to executive bodies to make laws. So having dwelled extensively on delegated legislation, we are just reviewing the types. All right, students, you have 1 minute. 1 minute more. So let's have a review of what we have on our list. Types of delegated legislation. And we are looking at 3. We discussed more than 3. Bylaws, orders in council, statutory instruments. And maybe let's look at provisional orders and even special procedure orders. But we are focusing on 3. Bylaws come under the form of delegated legislation made by local governments and possibly some public corporations to govern the activities of their corporations. But they apply basically to local areas. So local governments fall really within the context. Every local government in Nigeria, for instance, and in other countries is empowered to make laws or to govern its geographical area. The law that apply to my local government in Cross River State would definitely not apply to your local government in Lagos State or Kwara State, as the case may be, because we have geographical differences. So bylaws are laws made by local governments. It could be laws on how local markets are to be governed, how funds are to be raised from tickets. It could be laws bordering on public sanitation and all of that. The use of kiosks in markets, wheelbarrows, trucks, and that. So all these regulations that are made at the local government level to put in order and sanity in the operations, all of them fall under bylaws. They are made by local governments. You can call it BYE, or you can spell that BYE, then laws, or BY. It is all correct. Bylaws made by local governments, and they are limited in scope in the sense that they only apply to the local governments where they are made. Now we've just made reference to statutory instruments. Statutory instruments refer to rules, orders, and regulations made by ministers or government departments. You know that in the ministries form the bulk of, or let's say the core of the executive organ of government. We have over 20 ministries all over. And every day they are performing specific functions. So in order for them to be able to perform these functions effectively and to get the activities of people under them regulated, it's necessary to make orders, rules, and regulations. If you go to the market, for instance, or any good bookshop, you can get civil service rules. If you are a civil servant, you must work within these rules that are so stipulated. So all of that comes under what? Statutory instruments. Rules made by ministers and government departments. For instance, the Ministry of Health can come up with a rule or a regulation that no smoking. Smoking is dangerous to health. So all of that are what? Or let's say fall under statutory instruments. And then we talk of special, provisional orders. Provisional orders, as the name implies, are temporary general rules. When we say something is provisional, that means it is not yet permanent. It's temporary at some point until it receives the final approval that confers on it a permanent status. For instance, in the university, you may be given a provisional admission. That provisional admission doesn't mean you have entered the university, but you stand a chance of being considered. You stand a great chance of being considered eventually. So most students that get provisional admissions eventually get admitted. So when something is provisional, it is to some extent not permanent until certain processes have been tidied up. Now, provisional orders, again, I say, are temporary general rules that are even made in ministries or government departments or even public corporations, waiting for the approval of the parliament before they can take effect in such ministries, hence the name provisional. We talked about orders in council as a type of delegated legislation that is very peculiar to the British monarch. We don't have that in Nigeria. But you know, we have so much to do with in common with Britain. We're colonized by Britain, and our system is patterned after Britain. Except that from 1979, 1st October, Nigeria switched from parliamentary system, which we borrowed from the Britain, to presidential system patterned along that of the United States. But that's why that even after independence, even as we speak, we still have so much to do in common with Britain. They influence so much of our operations and especially our foreign policy. And having said that, the British monarch has a power to exercise unusual powers when the security of the state or let's say of Britain is threatened. So that falls under what we call orders in council. The council here refers to the Privy Council in London. You can call that the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London. This was the highest court of appeal for Nigeria before independence. Even at independence, between 1960 and 1963, we're still making appeals to the Privy Council until the Supreme Court got a status of the final court of appeal for Nigeria. So the British monarch can confer with the Privy Council in London, that's the UK, and come up with some emergency declarations or powerful declarations when she notices that Britain is in danger. There are some steps that will be taken very quickly to contain that situation, which if left to the usual parliamentary legislative process to take place, then it would have wasted a lot of time. Remember, one of the essence of delegating power or authority to other bodies is to take quick action so that cases that need to be attended to with time can be handled within the time. And of course, we have special procedure orders, which I would say apply so much to the military. When military operations are in place, there are orders that are given which come under very special procedure. And they are limited in scope, so that they are not really general. But be that as it may, they all fall under what? Delegated legislation. In the sense that none of these bodies in the executive actually has the power to make laws. It is the National Assembly that is made up of elected representatives that have the sovereign power to make laws. For all these bodies at one point or the other that I mentioned find themselves making laws coming under what? Delegated legislation. In our previous lesson, we have looked at, we have answered the question of the necessity. Why do we allow that to happen? Is it democratic and all of that? But we have found that in the long run, and even in the short run, that have been very beneficial to the National Assembly by kind of reducing their workload and then giving room for experts to come up with the details of every legislation, which of course the parliament, being made up of mostly politicians, cannot really handle. So they only provide a skeleton, the skeletal framework, and then leave out the details for experts to deal with that. Take for instance, if a law is to be made or laws are to be made bordering on medical practice or the operation of hospitals, how patients are treated and all of that, politicians don't know, except maybe a few, wouldn't know so much about medicine. And they'll be handicapped dealing with the details of such a law. Because what is involved is very, very technical. So the expert, the medical doctors would be consulted to fill in the details under the act, which is the enabling law given by the parliament. And when those details are filled in, they are cross-checked through parliamentary processes. And if they pass the test of time, then they eventually become laws for the federation. So students, we have been able to review some types of delegated legislation. That is not the focus of our lesson today anyway. But we need to get on back to that so that you can quickly pick, and then we move on to where we need to go. I expect that you've watched this video on delegated legislation. Of course, I played one for you on the screen, and then you've equally read this article. You need to do a lot of reading, especially now that you're at home. The more you read, the more you acquire knowledge, the more you gain experience. Here again, a picture to buttress what we've said. This is the National Assembly comprising the Senate, which is the upper house, made up of 109 senators. You can equally call that the Red Chamber. And of course, the House of Representatives. People call it the lower house, but in status, it's not actually the lower house. But as the name it is called, you can call it the Green Chamber as well. It is made up of 360 honorable members of parliament. Remember, at the national level, we have a bicameral legislature, 2 chambers. But at the state level, every state in Nigeria has 1 state house of assembly. And that's, of course, what? A unicameral legislature. Therefore, the difference between bicameral legislation and the unicameral is just in the number of chambers. 1 chamber unicameral, 2 chambers bicameral. I've not heard of 3 chambers. Maybe when we hear of that, and it will be made known to you. Now you can see this arrow pointing at ministries. That means power has been delegated to ministers, which we've of course just discussed, and then this other one pointing at local governments. Local governments are in the center of making bylaws, being a form of very common delegated legislation. In case you don't have the notes on the types of delegated legislation, check it out from your assignment page, the lesson of Monday, 4th May 2020. You can also get it from your essential government textbook from pages 152 to 153. If you have the same textbook that I have, and I'm sure that one you have the current edition. In the previous lesson, we also looked at the merits and the demerits of delegated legislation. The weight of today's lesson is actually on why it is necessary to control delegated legislation. Why is it necessary to control delegated legislation? And before we even get into the point of legislation, we may even ask ourselves, why do I need to control my children? Why do I need to be controlled as a worker? Why do our parents need to put some mechanisms in place to check our activities? And the simple answer you may give, or you would give, is that if we are not put under some forms of control, we will really run out of our space. We will do things that we are not supposed to do. And that will get us into trouble and endanger our individual and even corporate existence as families in the society. So if at the individual level we need to be controlled, even as workers, we need to be controlled by the rules and regulations governing the organizations or institutions under which we work. Then at the level of government or at the level of lawmaking, if power is given out to some bodies in the executive, is a body in charge of law implementation outside. Such power, if not controlled, has a tendency of being abused. And when one such power is abused, it means the whole essence of delegated legislation is defeated. It is on this note that it is needful to actually check the bodies or the institutions exercising delegated legislation. And in view of that, the parliament has, and other bodies have put mechanisms in place to check and control delegated legislation. Therefore, the major reason for control of delegated legislation is to guard against abuse of legislative power by bodies involved in delegated or secondary legislation. Now look at this the diagram on the board, very beautifully presented to give you a real picture of what we are talking about. How the parliament controls delegated legislation. I don't want you to get confused with the words parliament and legislation. Parliament actually means legislature. In fact, parliament is what the Britain uses. So when we refer to parliament, we mean the same thing as legislature in Nigeria. So how does a parliament control delegated legislation? Remember, we've said previously that delegated legislation can be summarized as rules, orders, and regulations made by ministers, made by local government, made by corporate bodies, public corporations, and all of that to govern their operations. And remember, these bodies are outside the legislature. So constitutionally, they should not be making laws, but they find themselves making laws, and we've given the reasons. So if all these bodies say, this is the Ministry of Internal Affairs here, this the power holding company of Nigeria, public corporation, which is to some extent privatized, then you have local governments. If they are all making submission of the rules, orders, and regulations that they've made to govern their operations, how does the parliament deal with that? Now let's look at the stages. The first way the parliament controls delegated legislation is what we call the Parent Act or the primary legislation. The Parent Act becomes the skeletal framework, as we said earlier, that provides the general principles that will govern any details that are coming in to make up the law. Like me giving you a cover page of an exercise book, and they say go and fill in the content. When you fill in the content, when you just come back, I will put in the cover page, and it becomes a whole exercise. Then somebody will staple and will begin to use. So the parliament gives the framework, the skeleton, and those details are further. So the parliament will therefore check using what has been provided by the Parent Act, by the primary legislation. And if, for instance, any of these rules, orders, and regulations go contrary to the provisions of the Parent Act, that the principles within the Act, then the Parliament will reject it. Do what we call rejection. Will reject it. They will just look at it and it will not be accepted. It could also be that the Parliament will give what we call affirmative action. If they review these rules, orders, and regulations and finds that they are consistent, they are okay, they really fall in place and they can serve the purpose of which they've been made, then an affirmative action. Affirmation means to really say something is okay. Yeah, it's okay, we can get on with it. So they give an affirmative action to a majority of the votes. And then those rules, orders, and regulations are received and given a covering by the National Assembly or Parliament, and they become laws. And when once they become law, they also fall back as acts of Parliament, through which other laws can equally be made. Outside that, the Parliament can set up committees, special committees, especially on technical grounds, to look at the statutory instruments made by ministers, especially and government departments. So if these committees find any faults within these rules, orders, and regulations, of course, they'll report back to the Parliament, and if such faults are not quickly corrected, those rules, orders, and regulations will not be accepted. Outside that, the Parliament could also set up ad hoc committees or even standing committees. An ad hoc committee is one that is set up just on a temporary basis. Something comes up, there's need to set up a committee to deal with that. And when that is there, with the work of that committee ends. That is an ad hoc committee. But the standing committee remains to deal with issues continually. So the Parliament set up committees to really look into what is happening in these ministries and government departments in terms of the rules, orders, and regulations they are making within their ministries. It could be that at some point these rules may violate even human rights. And then, of course, there will be an outcry. And if that happens, even though the judiciary deals with it, which we are going to, but if that happens, then it means those clauses or areas where you have such inconsistency will be checked and filtered out before such rules are adopted, even to serve their purposes in the ministry. One thing you must understand is that every ministry covers the entire federation. So you cannot come up with laws that really jeopardize or undermine the interest or even the rights of the people, which are, of course, fundamental and defended and protected by our Constitution. So many things have I said here the Parliament does. First, Every rule, order, and regulation made by ministries, local governments, public corporations, and all of that are checked to the principal and the parent act, or what you may call the primary legislation, to ensure they are consistent with the guiding principles of the act. If any inconsistency is found, then they are thrown away. They wouldn't stand. A committee could also be empowered by the parliament to deal with statutory instruments, which are rules, orders, and regulations made especially by ministries, government departments, and agencies. And the essence is to ensure that there is a balance, that the purpose of making these rules is that there is no abuse in the process, and everything will run out the way it is expected. The parliament uses affirmative action when the rules, orders, and regulations made are totally compliant and consistent with what is expected. But on the other hand, rejection will be applied and those rules will be thrown back when they are found to be inconsistent. Inconsistent means they are not in line with what the parliament, with the framework provided by the parliament. And consistent means they are okay, they fall in line. Like your teacher gives you an assignment and tells you these are the steps you are going to follow to do this assignment. And you come back with a smile on your face, having followed all the steps. And your teacher gives you a high five. That's an affirmation that you've done the right thing. If another, let's say your colleague comes up with something different, your teacher gives, maybe rejects his or her work, and possibly ask him or her to look at what you've done and go back and do it better, correct these mistakes before the work will be made. So let's take your questions at this point if you need any clarity other than what we've said. So make sure you study this diagram. It's very, very important, and it took me a lot of time to really prepare it. Don't just put it there. Study and ensure you get a detail of everything. You can also try to represent this in your own way. In your own way. Read and try to give interpretation for what to what you are reading in your own understanding. It will help you understand them more. Our time is running out. Let's see how the judiciary controls delegated legislation. One thing we must know is that, or I know you already know that we have three organs of government, which are separated in terms of functions and personnel, but they work cooperatively for the overall functioning of the government. What are these three organs? We have the executive, we have the legislature, and of course the judiciary. The legislature being the body that makes laws for the nation. The executive, the body that enforces or implements the laws made by the legislation. And of course, the judiciary, which is the body in charge of interpreting and applying laws when they are violated or broken. The judiciary delivers judgment on cases. Well, that's why you see people going to court every now and then. You can see the legislation makes law but has no power to interpret the laws. The executive implement law but have no power to make law except under delegated legislation. And the essence of all this is to make for a balance of power between the organs, among the organs of government, so that no one organ of government exercises, sees itself to be superior to others. There should be a balance of power. So you cannot say the executive is more than the judiciary, or the judiciary is more than the legislation, and all of that. So having given that background, let's see what the judiciary does. The judiciary, you must know that as well, is the body that defends our constitution. It's made up of all the lawyers, all the courts you can see in the federation, from the customary court at the local government up to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in Nigeria. All of that fall within the purview of the judiciary. So the judiciary has what we call judicial review, which is the power it has to look at executive or legislative actions in connection with constitutional provisions. And if those actions are reviewed, hence the word review, against the provisions of the Constitution, and if any of them is found to be inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, then the judiciary has the power to declare such actions ultra vires. And I'm going to explain what ultra vires means. Ultra vires means going beyond the powers conferred by the Constitution for such actions to be carried out or for such laws to be made. If in case, of course, we are talking about delegated legislation made by executive, but the judiciary will equally look at that. We have talked about the legislation on the one hand, the judiciary will look at that and see how consistent they are with the provisions of the Constitution. So if any inconsistency occurs, they are declared ultra vires. There could be procedural ultra vires or substantive ultra vires, but this is not for your level. But procedural ultra vires means when the laws made under delegated legislation have gone above the procedure, or let's say measures have been adopted beyond the procedure that have been set aside by the parent act, then we call that procedural ultra vires. The focus is on the procedure followed to get such laws in place. If the procedure is examined and it is above what the parent act has permitted, or what the Constitution has permitted, as the case may be, then procedural ultra vires takes place. But nobody will ask you about this at the level of SSC. Remember, we are not just studying because we want to write exams, but we are studying for knowledge. Exams should be the minimum, the minimum benchmark that one should be looking at. But if you know this, it helps you. Then when we talk of substantial ultra vires, we are talking of the substance. If the substance of that law has gone beyond the power given for that law to be made, it becomes what substantial or ultra vires. And when once that term ultra vires is applied, it means such laws are going to be declared null and void to the extent of their inconsistency. So that's a major way the judiciary checks delegated legislation, all in the need to defend the Constitution from violation or abuse. You know, when people go to court, references are always made to the Constitution. Every judgment that is delivered must find its backing within the Constitution. Otherwise, that judgment will not be legal. And even outside delegated legislation, the day-to-day running of government, the judiciary still exercises judicial review, looking at what the executive, the executive organ does, and equally what the parliamentarians are doing within the context of what the law, that is the Constitution, the fundamental law empowers them to do. Checking consistency and inconsistency. And when anything is found to be inconsistent, then of course, what we have said before will now fall in place. Those laws will be said to be null and void and will of course be rejected. The process will go over and over until the right thing is done. So in this way, the judiciary checks their delegated legislation. You can see whereas the parliament has the parent act emanating from it, the committees, the affirmative action, and the power to reject as mechanism to check. The judiciary uses was judicial review, all ensuring that these laws made meet constitutional provisions. Outside that, they are thrown out. So in this way, if anybody is given power, if any member of the executive is given power to make laws on issues, you won't go, doing whatever you think you can do in your own way. In your own way, thinking that it will stand. You still know that you are being checked. You are being checked, the right thing must be done. And that's the whole essence of government. Now the notes for these lessons are all here. And I want you to go, but this PowerPoint is already on your assignment page, file 1. Just go in there and download and study the content. And you can equally read up everything here from your text. But I'm very sure this will give you more explanation than what we ever have in your text, especially the PowerPoint. It gives you the whole picture of the process of delegated legislation, how it is controlled. Okay, and then you do this exit ticket before you go. You have like your time is almost up. Quickly put them in the chat box. 5 questions. The organ of government that protect the constitution is the dash. Fill in the answer then. The parent act is also known as the act of dash or dash legislation. Put in the details there, the answers. So the delegated legislation is made up of rules, dash, and dash. Put in the details and post them in the chat. 4, the judiciary control delegated legislation through a process called judicial dash. 5, and the final one, laws made by local governments are known as dash. Now, what is left here are your quiz questions, which I expect you to go over and answer them and send them to me, to the assignment page for marking and, of course, grading. If there is any previous assignment you've not done, ensure you do it. Do that assignment, post so that we can mark and grade. All is to ensure that we are all making progress. We are not stagnated by what is happening. We are moving on. Okay, you have 8 objective questions here, and then 2 theory questions. I expect you to deal with that and submit. Thank you for joining the lesson, and see you again the same time on Monday. Have a blessed day.